I subscribe to a subreddit called Reddit School, and it's basically a forum for people to share their thoughts and feelings as they try and get into the professional wrestling industry. And I'm always interested to see what people think, because getting into professional wrestling is a singular experience. Not like where you might do a certain sport at school and then progress after you leave school, or you take a drama class and then you end up becoming an actor. Professional wrestling, on the other hand, is something you have to do yourself. The avenues for getting into it aren't there the way that they are for things like acting or sport or music. And that's why people, whenever they're getting into pro wrestling, they can feel as though they're having a very singular experience that no one else can really understand. But as this subreddit, Reddit School, proves, a lot of us have the very, very similar thoughts and feelings about going into pro wrestling. One example that I've seen a lot recently is people who believe they might be too old to actually start training. It might be too late for them. They might have missed the boat. And I think that that's a very, very dangerous concept. And I think the first thing people need to realize is how many other people think this about going into pro wrestling. And I think that the reason for this problem is the same reason as a lot of the issues people have going into this business, where there's an imbalance between the catalysts for making you go into pro wrestling in the first place. Now, this is not scientific at all, but the way that I see it, there are two main driving forces behind people going into this sort of thing, where it's they're pursuing a dream. Now, like I said, this is not scientific, but as I see it, on the one hand you have inspiration, and on the other hand you have motivation. I guess in a way you could see it as a kind of carrot and a stick idea. Now, with things like pro wrestling, sport, music, acting, inspiration, the idea that these things capture your imagination and you start to imagine what you could do in these industries, that's a real driving force between so many people trying to get into them. I mean, with pro wrestling alone, that's evidenced by the number of people who say, oh yeah, I wanna be on WrestleMania one day. I mean, if you watch WrestleMania, it's a pure spectacle that captures people's imaginations, and 90% of the people watching it are thinking, Christ, I would love to do that. So it's very, very easy to be inspired to get into professional wrestling. Motivation, on the other hand, as I see it, that's just the word I'm using for it. That's where it's kind of a need to do it. You have a need to fulfill, and therefore you plan out the next steps, the next little goal, and then you complete it all task by task. It's less to do with a sort of infinite imagination of the possibilities of things you can do and thinking about the things you actually need to do in order to progress. And that's tough with pro wrestling, because 99% of the people who get into pro wrestling are fans of pro wrestling. I mean, that should sort of be taken for granted. Now, inspiration is a double-edged sword as I see it with pro wrestling, because on the one hand, this is not like a sport. It's not like acting or music, and it might sound bad, but those things require real talent. In the case of sport, it's pure athleticism. In the case of music, if you can't sing, it's going to be pretty tough to become a singer. But because pro wrestling blends athleticism with acting, more importantly with creativity and storytelling, basically you can find a place for yourself in pro wrestling no matter what your qualities are. And it's for that reason that more than sport, more than music, more than acting, I feel like people should not be happy being just fans of pro wrestling. You can do something in it. You can get into it one way or another. Doesn't mean you're going to main event WrestleMania. It doesn't mean you're going to be, in the WWE or anything even close to that. But you don't have to just sit back and enjoy it passively. If wrestling really captures your imagination, then find a place for yourself in an independent. If you're not athletic and you don't intend to try and become athletic, then ask about what you can do backstage ask if you can interview people, or you can maybe try and work on commentary, or you can do video editing or social media or something. There'll be a place for you, and you can feel like you're a part of it and not just another person in the audience. Now, like I said, the fact that pro wrestling captures people's imaginations is a double-edged sword, because yes, all these people can get into pro wrestling if they really want to, but because WWE especially gives people these really grand ideas of what pro wrestling can be and what they can do in it, it becomes really, really tough for people to get into pro wrestling when it's not exactly like how they imagined it. The fact is, so many of us, our first encounter with pro wrestling, and the one that captures our imagination usually as a kid, is WWE. It's on TV, it's all these world-class athletes, all these beautiful people, and this fantastic presentation, and that kind of embeds itself in your imagination. And when you look at an independent or even just a lesser promotion that doesn't have the budget they do, doesn't have the following that they do, you can kind of automatically be looking at it from the wrong perspective. It's like you're weighing it up against WWE, and it's never going to look the same. It's never going to be as good. And where that fits in with people's imagination as they're trying to get into pro wrestling, you know, not too many of us are imagining, you know, wrestling in front of 10 people in a shed. When we think about ourselves in pro wrestling, we think about ourselves at WrestleMania or at Wrestle Kingdom, or you know, we think about ourselves as being amongst the very best and doing the best things that pro wrestling has to offer. I mean, none of us really even think about, oh yeah, I'd love to be in the WWE, even if it's just as a job, or even if it's just as, you know, somebody who never gets any TV time. Nobody really thinks like that. Even the people doing that on TV are probably still fighting with this idea in their head that that one day I can make it, one day I can be the main event, I can be the top guy. Even the number of people who say, oh yeah, it's my goal to main event WrestleMania. WrestleMania has been main evented by the same guy the past 3 years. It's not an even playing field. You're not going to get what you want simply by wanting it. So the reason that so many people become disillusioned with the idea of getting into professional wrestling is because it's not like they imagined. You know, I remember turning up to my first training session and I just didn't know what I was doing, and there were guys there who were kind of out of shape and not particularly athletic, and they were wrestling circles around me. And that can dent your confidence, because most people, being naturally optimistic, will think, oh yeah, I'll go in and I'll be fantastic. So the idea of what I'm calling motivation, the idea of breaking down exactly what you need to be doing in order to actually progress, the people who have that in their heads are the people who actually make it. Now, where this ties into age as a concept and being too old to start, basically I'm 23, about to turn 24, and in my head I think I'm too old. I've seen posts from guys who are 22 saying they're too old. I've seen posts from guys who are like in their 30s saying they're too old. And I really think that the reason that this is just a thing that people say, is because whatever age you start wrestling at, it's not going to be the ideal age. You know, I'm 23. Pete Dunne and Tyler Bate are already on, you know, they're already world-class wrestlers. And I know in theory you should say, oh yeah, don't measure yourself up to these people, but the fact is that they have managed to do that in a space of time where I haven't been doing it. And the problem is, when people think about their ideal wrestling career, it's already started. When I think about, you know, my ideal wrestling career, maybe I'm like 27 and I'm, you know, at Wrestle Kingdom. But all you have to do is look at the age of people actually doing that sort of thing at the top of their game, and they're all in their 30s. They're all in their 30s, and yet they've started training at like 16, 17, 18. So the problem is, because pro wrestling captures our imagination runs wild, and we're never truly thinking about what we can do, what we can actually do to begin a professional wrestling career. We get into pro wrestling with these ideas of these amazing careers we're going to have, but then as we start to think about the actual logistics of it, things like age get in the way. Oh yeah, I want to main event WrestleMania, but I'm 28. Is that too late to main event WrestleMania if I want to do that in 10 years? The fact is, there is absolutely no timeline for this other than when you start. So in order to start, we need to transfer our energy from our imagination and these amazing things we think we're going to do in professional wrestling, and putting all of that energy into what is the first thing that I can do. Your age is always going to get in the way of your imagination. When I imagine what I want to be doing in professional wrestling, it doesn't account for the fact that I'm nearly 24 and I haven't even started training. There is never going to be an ideal start. I'm sure there are wrestlers who are 30 who have been training for 10 years and thinking, Christ, maybe I started too late because I haven't done the crazy imaginative things that I thought I was going to be able to do. But there will be far fewer people in professional wrestling being held back by their imagination than people trying to get into professional wrestling. There is a reason that 15,000 people can go to a WWE show and only 30 people maybe step into the ring during that show. Because pretty much everyone in the audience will have their imagination captured by what they're seeing, but so few of them will actually be able to reduce their imagination into realistic steps as to how do I actually get in there. And I would never say for a second to stave off your creativity or the big dreams you might have for getting into wrestling. I'm just saying that we all need to figure out the first steps and then keep going from there. Because the fact is that inspiration, it doesn't give you the returns that you want all the time. For instance, I've often thought of myself like, oh yeah, maybe one day with like a YouTube channel, I could have a YouTube channel with like 100,000 subscribers and, loads of people all watching my video and interacting with what I'm saying. But in reality, that idea, it's nice to think about, and, I could spend all day thinking about it, but I actually feel so much better just sitting down and actually making a video. Even if like 3 people see this. Like with pro wrestling, as much as my imagination being captured and, seeing these amazing things and thinking about, oh, this amazing career that I might have, that'll make me feel good for a second, but I feel amazing when I walk out of a good training session. And I'm not talking like good as in I wrestled a good match or anything like that. I mean good as in, yeah, I did one good back bump. I'll walk out thinking that, I've actually really accomplished something. And yes, even with that, it's incredibly hard to translate that good feeling that I have into motivation to do the next training session. But I truly believe that everyone can give pro wrestling a shot. And all it really takes is kind of staving off these big grand ideas of what we would be doing in pro wrestling and thinking more about the little things of going to a training session and maybe getting on an independent. And when I went to these training sessions, the people around me that had been there, they absolutely love it. Because once you're in the actual system, you'll be inspired by new things that you see. All of a sudden, you're not imagining yourself being on WWE. You're imagining yourself being in the main event of this independent. And because that's naturally a lower goal, it's easier to translate your energy into the steps required to actually make it there. I mean, when you think about it, age is the ultimate abstract concept. I mean, yes, this is an athletic endeavor, but as much as we all want to think we're going to be in WWE, nothing is guaranteed. So the time that we're all wasting thinking about having crazy, amazing careers, we're actually not having careers at all. And yes, this is coming from a personal place where I have put off really investing myself in training in a school because of a lot of factors, but things like age, that always creeps into my head. I'm always thinking about, oh, I'm 23 and I'm going to be 24 and I haven't done anything. I mean, does that mean I'm not going to be doing what I want to be doing until I'm 34? And of course, that's going to be a demoralizing idea. So, You just have to put it out of your head. Instead of thinking about what you want to do, in 10 years, because none of us are going to make it to the WrestleMania main event in, a year. Start thinking about what you want to have done in a year and be realistic. I'm not saying be realistic as like a downer. I mean, look at the school you want to go to, the promotions it's attached to, and start thinking, what do I need to do to get onto their show? And I promise you, when you start reducing your goals into actual manageable things, you'll start getting a payoff that you're never ever going to get just from imagining having an amazing career. So yes, this is a personal thing. So it upsets me when I see people, saying about how they feel like they might be too old to start training. Pro wrestling is not that kind of business. Like I said, yes, there is an athletic side to it, but there will always be a role for you. And if you can think less about being in the WWE and more about actually being a part of your independent and being a part of pro wrestling. Like I've said it before, but pro wrestling is a ridiculous thing. Like, it shouldn't really exist. But the fact that it does is an amazing, amazing stroke of luck for all of us. So please don't get yourself down about things like your age, because if you get into pro wrestling, if you just get your foot in the door, you'll start to get so much more out of it than just sitting watching it and imagining being Roman Reigns or Seth Rollins. You get so much more from your actual own accomplishments, even if they're nothing compared to theirs. You will feel like you're conquering the world step by step, as opposed to, what I'm doing, which is sitting, imagining a great career that isn't materializing at the minute. I was meant to be working so that I could stay in Scotland and go to the Glasgow Pro Wrestling Asylum, which is linked to ICW, which is a very good independent promotion. But really, because I couldn't use my imagination and my inspiration of wanting to do that as fuel for doing things like working nights in a supermarket, I ended up quitting my job and coming home. I can't really do pro wrestling training at home, but I still intend to get myself in better shape, and then hopefully, I know that a lot of people on Reddit School will say similar things, but hopefully in 6 months I'm going to head back to either England or Scotland and try and find work and try and find a school. But in the meantime, I will be hopefully posting more YouTube videos with ideas, because I need an outlet for some of this. I can't really talk to anybody about it. So yeah, people on Reddit School, if you have any ideas about the shit I'm talking about, love to hear from you. But yeah, don't worry about your age. It's not. I know everyone always says, oh, DDP, he was 34. Yeah, but DDP also became world champion in 5 years or whatever it was. Let's stop trying to get into pro wrestling based purely on our imagination and start thinking about the actual tangible things that we can do in order to start. Just start. Not thinking about the end goal 10 years down the line, just thinking about the very beginning of what could be a fantastic career.